Hey, hello everyone. Hi Steve.
Hey everyone, Steve Buchanan here with Hari Ram, and we're excited to have you on this Learn Live session.
Hey,
So,
hi. Yeah, thanks for attending our session. And I'm here to talk about open source database migration on Azure. Yeah, over to you, Steve.
and I'm here to talk about Azure or Linux on Azure. And so we are going to let me move to the PowerPoint here. We are going to talk about Linux on Azure and open source database migration. We also have a couple of moderators that are in the chat that will be there to answer your questions and feed questions to us and interact with you. So welcome Kelly and Garima as well. And we are going through these learn modules. So if you want to follow along with the learn modules, you can go to those links there, access those, and follow along. This will be interactive, so don't be shy about saying hi in the chat, asking questions in the chat, and just interact. So there will be knowledge checks at the end of each section as well. So you'll be able to check your knowledge and see if you know how much you've learned. So we'll dive right in. So I'm going to cover Linux on Azure, and these are the objectives that are a part of that learn module. And it's really about understanding the differences between IaaS and PaaS when you're running Linux on Azure, as well as the value of each, right? The next objective is really about describing the Azure tools and services that are there that can add value to your Linux workloads when they're running on Azure. And then also looking at the components of Linux's virtual infrastructure on Azure and the role that we play in the different distributions in that Linux world. And then also describing the value of Linux-based service platforms on Azure. And there's two more. So really envisioning what you can build with Linux-based workloads on Azure, and also being able to migrate existing workloads that you might have on premises to Azure, whether that's Linux and also later from a database perspective. And then we'll finish up things with being able to figure out what the right choice is to run your Linux on Azure. So Azure is a cloud with many services, and it's growing. And we'll go through some of those services. And it's basically just a collection of services that are growing, from things to, identity, database, as you'll see, container technologies, storage, even AI, and much, much more. And we'll talk about where Linux comes into play there. Now, you'll want to be familiar with a couple of concepts as you're going into this Learn module, and you really want to understand IaaS and PaaS. And we won't have time to really dive super deep into those here on this Learn Live. We will touch on them, but if you want to get more information about those, you can go to that link there and get the fundamental concepts in Azure and dive deeper into IaaS and PaaS. So really, what is Linux on Azure? It's really two things. It's the infrastructure as service, and it's the platform as a service. And Linux infrastructure, when it comes to IaaS, is really Linux running on virtual machines in Azure, right? And then from a PaaS perspective, there's a number of services that are in Azure. And so you don't have to worry about managing the underlying infrastructure. You don't have to install Linux on virtual machines. You go and you sign up for the service and you consume the service and start running your Linux workloads. So good examples of this are Azure App Service, as well as Azure Functions. And then there's a number of different container technologies such as AKS. And so you could actually take a Linux program and go run it in Azure Functions. You don't have to worry about the servers. You just take your Linux-based workload and you just run it up there. Same thing with Azure App Service. If you have like a web app that's Linux-based, you can run it in Azure App Service and you don't have to worry about managing the servers like you do with IaaS. And so there's pros and cons to each. There's use cases for each, and sometimes you may need full control over the servers where you're running your Linux workloads, and so that would go to IaaS. And if you don't need that, you might want to look at PaaS. Now, there's a number of additional services that are in Azure that can help enhance the experience of running Linux on Azure and really complement your Linux workloads. And so some of them are like Azure Active Directory, being able to back up your Linux workloads, or even have disaster recovery for your Linux workloads, and making those things easier because Azure Backup and Azure Site Recovery are examples, and those are Azure services where you can turn them on and configure them for your Linux workloads. Also, things like monitoring and even storage are there as well to help complement your Linux workloads. Now, in Azure, kind of the core and the glue of Azure is Azure Resource Manager, right? And this is standard interface and a set of concepts where all of the services in Azure are built on top of ARM. And then when you're interacting with Azure, you're also interacting with ARM. If you want to interact with Azure at an API layer, you interact with ARM. If you're doing something with the services, you're interacting with ARM. And it gives you that flexibility. And so when you start to run Linux workloads on Azure, you also have the power of ARM that it brings from a cloud perspective. And in Azure, we have Azure Storage Services, which is a number of different services that are there to help complement when you're running workloads. And some of these are Azure Blob, and this is basically just unstructured storage that you could use for a number of different use cases. There's Azure File, so think of that as like file shares. And then there's Azure Queue, so if you're doing messaging in an application that you're running, you could use Azure Queue to help with that workload. There's more storage services than this as well, and there's a number of them out there, and you can go to Microsoft's Learn site and learn all about the Azure storage services. And then there's virtual networking, right? So especially from an IaaS perspective, if you're running your Linux workloads, you'll need a way to access those. If you're running workloads for customers, you'll need a way for them to access those services. And so there's virtual networking available in the cloud. And this is a number of services, from the actual virtual networking itself to things like ExpressRoute. If you need to connect your on-premises up to the cloud, maybe you have some workloads running on premises, maybe you have some Linux workloads running in the cloud, you can connect those two over a very fast connection. And there's other services like Traffic Manager, Azure Front Door, and even load balancers that you can put in front of your Linux workloads. And so your external customers would hit those services to access those workloads. There's a number of other additional concepts and components that are in Azure's virtual networking, and we won't be able to cover all of those today, but it's really good to understand at least a base level, especially when you're looking at running your workloads on Azure. And then there's Azure Database Services, and we won't go too deep into this. We don't want to steal Hari Ram's thunder here, but there's a number of database services available, and of course you could run databases on full-blown virtual machines in Azure, or you could use some of the PaaS services, and Hari Ram will talk about what we have, but I'll touch on the fact that we have Postgres, we We have MySQL. We even have the capability to run some MariaDB. And services like MySQL and Postgres are often used with Linux workloads. So those services are there to complement your Linux workloads and really give you the same capabilities that you have on premises or wherever you're running those Linux workloads today. And then we have AI services in Azure. You've probably heard a lot about that recently. And so if you start to run your Linux workloads on Azure, you also could start to leverage the AI capabilities with your Linux workloads and even do some integration and bring that capability there, bringing those together. And so there's a number of AI services that are on Azure, and you can go learn more about those on Microsoft Learn. Now, if you move your Linux workloads to Azure or you spin up brand new Linux workloads in Azure, we need to manage those, right? Regardless if they're running on IaaS or even on PaaS, you need to do things like monitor them, back them up, secure them, organize them from a taxonomy perspective. There's a number of different things that come along with running those Linux workloads. And Azure has a number of services to help with that, from policy and compliance management to monitoring with Azure Monitor, even with like resource groups, management groups, being able to tag resources so you can quickly see what the Linux workloads are. Maybe you're doing things like chargeback or showback, and you can use the governance and monitoring tooling to help you basically manage your Linux workloads. And this stretches across IaaS and PaaS. And then there's securing your workloads. So that's super critical. And there's a robust suite of security services that are in Azure that you can use, again, for IaaS or even PaaS, things like Defender, Sentinel. And so you can continuously analyze your workloads. You can get alerting, and there's a number of things that you can do. We're not going to dive super deep into the security aspect, but there's a lot that you can do from securing your Linux workloads when they're running on Azure. And then from a business continuity and DR perspective, right? Mentioned this earlier, you have Azure backup, so you can back up and restore your workloads. And again, you can do this for VMs. You can do it for some PaaS services. It just depends on the PaaS service. And so backing up your workloads is critical. And then there's Azure Site Recovery, so you could actually put DR in place around your workloads. And you can even do things with ASR, like if you have Linux workloads running on premises, you could set up DR so you can fail over those workloads to the cloud, or you could even fail over those workloads from the cloud to, let's say, another data center. There's a lot of flexibility and capabilities that exist with ASR. And so these are services that can complement your Linux workloads, and they're fully supported in these services, as well as a lot of the other services that I mentioned previously. So now the next area in this Learn module is really, how do you use Linux on Azure, right? And the core of the Linux IaaS experience is all about the distribution that you choose and that you run on your Azure VMs. And so in Azure, there's a ton of VMs that are out there that you can select from to run on your actual VM. There's a full-blown marketplace where you could go and you could find the distro that you might be looking for. Some of them are pretty vanilla, right? So you just spin up the VM and run it, and then you go configure and deploy what you need from there. And some come as packages. So they might already have some things configured for you to speed things up because they're in a VM image. And so you can even see from the screenshot there, there's a Plesk Linux WordPress web hosting platform. So for example, if you deployed that VM, it's going to have that Plesk plus WordPress on it already for you, kind of ready to go. And so that's going to give you a jump start. So you can go into the marketplace and look at what's there, and you'll probably find a package solution that's based on Linux that already fits your needs. Or you could go with a vanilla Linux OS and then configure and install whatever workloads you have from there. And then, you know, Microsoft contributes to the Linux kernel, just the code itself, but we also make sure that many of the Linux distributions are fully compatible with Azure VMs. And so if you spin up a VM and you deploy Linux in that VM, it's going to work with Azure. It's already baked into the kernel. And these are some of the endorsed Linux distributions that we have. And so you can see some really common ones there, like Ubuntu and Red Hat and SUSE and even Oracle Linux. Now, you might have some workloads running in Linux already on premises, and maybe, you know, one of your concerns is, how do I get those workloads up to Azure? Well, there's actually an Azure Migrate tooling that you can use to help with this task. And so Azure Migrate is a, you know, it's tooling where you can connect to your on-premises VMs, and you can run the migration and migrate your Linux workloads right up to Azure. And it's pretty seamless. Now, in Azure, of course, there's different sizes and disks for the virtual machines. So you'll want to familiarize yourself with what's there and understand the costs and understand what you need so that you can optimize for costs. And so you'll want to go into the Learn module and dive a little bit deeper into the different sizes and the disks and make sure that you are sizing appropriately. Right? And there's different purposes with different sizes and disks. And here are some of them. So, you know, general purpose, basically use kind of a fits all, compute optimized, right? So if you have high CPU and memory ratio, it's going to be suited for that. Memory optimized, right? So high memory to CPU ratio. And then there's burstable VMs. Maybe you just need VMs that are small, but when there's a burst, you want those VMs to add resources so they can handle the workload, right? And so you're having a smaller cost during those times that those VMs aren't bursted, but when they burst, maybe the cost goes up temporarily. Storage optimized, right? So if you have workloads that have, you know, they're very IO intensive, so like database workloads, you'll want to use a storage optimized VM. And then there's even GPU enabled, and then there's high performance compute if you have that need as well. And then with your VMs, right, they could be scaled up and scaled down. You can go into the Azure portal and do that. You also can put some automation in place to scale up and scale down. And there's even virtual machine scale sets that can do some of that advanced automation for you as well. And that's part of the power of cloud versus, you know, on premises, is being able to scale up and down the resources as needed based on the load on your workloads or other metrics. Now, when you provision your VM in Linux, it doesn't just end there, right? There's a number of other services that you need. Like we talked about virtual networks, right? So you have your Linux workloads running on VMs. How do they connect to each other? How do maybe your customers or your users connect to those, right? If it's customers, they'll be coming into those VMs from the internet. So you might need other Azure services like front door, for example. You'll need to have a public IP to get to that. You might need DNS service. If you have end users that are connecting to those VMs and maybe they're running on-prem, you might need a express route in place, or you could do a site-to-site VPN for those, end users to be able to connect to your workloads. And so there's a number of things you need to think about from a virtual networking perspective. Network appliance. So I jumped ahead a little bit, right? If you need that external access or even the internal access, maybe you're doing some load balancing between some VMs, or you're doing some sort of failover architecture. You could put a load balancer in front of a couple of VMs. You also want to have the firewall there, right, to protect those VMs. And so you could use NSGs. Those are network security gateways, which are native to Azure, or you could use network appliance, right, to secure your workloads. And then you need to think about cloud storage. So we covered a little bit of the cloud storage. You may need to do some caching for your workloads. So we do have Azure Cache for Redis. We have that as a service, so you could utilize that. And then again, there's a number of database services. So typically, you're running your workload. It might have a front end, and then you need a database, right, to write data into that database. And so we have database services there available as well. And then application services that support your Linux workloads and really complement your Linux workloads. So let's say you're running a web app. You have some authentication happening within your web app. And so, right, in the code. And so you don't want to put the credentials right there in the code. You could use something like Azure Key Vault. You could store the credentials in Key Vault and access those credentials on the fly when needed, right? Or maybe you want to use a bot service to perform something, or even maybe you have some APIs in your Linux workloads and you need some API management. There's services in Azure to help with that as well. And from a management perspective, right, you would use ARM, Azure Resource Manager, to provision and also help configure your resources, meaning your VMs in Azure. There's VM extensions, so you can inject things you might need, like tools, into your VMs. You might need to run some scripts on those VMs when you provision them. And so you could use those VM extensions, which are available through ARM in Azure, to help facilitate that as well. And then, of course, cost, right? Running workloads in Azure is not free. However, there are a number of free services that are always free. And so you can check out that list. But you'll want to have some management around cost and understand the factors that are driving costs, and understand things like the VM sizing. And even when you get into the PaaS services, you still need to know what your load is and understand the workloads that you're going to run, because you can size your PaaS services using that to help, work through the cost. And there's different ways that you could pay for Azure, right? And those are listed here, so you could do a straight out pay as you go. So what you use is what you pay for. You could use those reserved instances, and so you would actually purchase in advance. A lot of enterprises do that, and so you get a discount there. There's a bring your own license or subscription, and so if you're running certain applications, let's say like Oracle, or some sort of Red Hat version, like the enterprise version. If you already have your licensing, you can bring your own licensing. Or if you need licensing, you can add that to what you pay to Azure. And so it's important to understand the pricing and the different options for paying for the pricing, because you want to make sure you're not missing out on some potential discounts. Like if you could go with reserved instances, you can get a discount there. Now, platform as a service for Linux, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but there's a number of different PaaS services and they're Linux based. So we talked about Azure App Service, we talked about Azure Functions, we have AKS, which is Kubernetes. You can run your Linux based containers there. And there's a number of additional PaaS services that are Linux based in Azure, and we can't cover them all today in this session, but you'll want to become familiar with those because there might be some PaaS services that'll fit your needs. Now, when do I use Linux, right? We've learned all about Linux on Azure. We've learned, IaaS and PaaS and some of the additional Azure services that complement running Linux on Azure. But when do you use Linux on Azure and what for? And so we'll talk about some of those things here. I'm not going to drain this entire list, but the first one is there's jointly developed solutions for specialized scenarios. And so a really common one is SAP on Azure. And so SUSE and even Red Hat have VMs in Azure that are fit and supported for SAP. And when I was working with Fortune 500 organizations, one of the big requirements up front is you have to have an OS that supports SAP to make sure that your SAP instances are supported, from SAP itself. And so it made it really easy. And straightforward when we would engage on a project that we could go to Azure and there already were VMs that were Linux based that were ready to go for SAP. And so that took time that we would have to do to configure those servers and kind of work through all the things you need to do to make sure it's supported. And so that was really helpful and sped things up. Also, if you're running like HPC workloads, that's another example, or maybe you're running Oracle workloads. That's another example where we already have what you need on Azure from a is this supported perspective. And then, your current development and deployment platform. So if you're already using Linux to develop and deploy software, Linux on Azure is a great option. And simplified and reduced costs. So again, that pay-as-you-go model, prepaid, enterprise agreements and reserved instances are examples of all of that. And so if you really understand your workloads, and maybe you run your workloads during the times when they're needed, but you shut down, for example, VMs when they're not needed, that's a way you can cut back on costs. And then simplified maintenance, right? So we'll go straight to PaaS. You're not managing the servers there. There's a number of things you're not managing and you don't have to worry about at that point, but you could still run your Linux-based workloads. From an IaaS perspective, same thing, right? So you're managing the VM at that point, but there's tooling in Azure to help streamline that and simplify that. And so you can definitely run your Linux workloads on Azure and simplify the maintenance. And then being elastic, right? So you need to burst, you need to scale up, you need to scale down, you need to scale out or scale in. Running on cloud makes that easier. Having access to ARM makes that easier, being able to automate against that. When we look at things like Terraform and being able to script against our VMs and even our PaaS services with things like Terraform, it becomes elastic and a lot easier to do. And so now let's dive into the knowledge check. I didn't have any demos. I wanted to leave time for Hari Ram. He's got some really cool demos and some exciting stuff to show you there. But let's dive into the knowledge check. We're going to go through a few questions, and then we'll get to the database portion.
Hey, Steve, that was really great and very informative as well. A lot of things I didn't know, and so thanks for covering that. Yeah, I'm just curious, like if which of the following best describes Linux infrastructure as a service or IaaS on Azure? Is it Azure virtual machines running Linux provisioned within a virtual network infrastructure, or is it a distributed multi-tenant Linux deployment maintained by Microsoft and powered by Azure servers? Or is it C, a collection of platform services to which you can deploy Linux based applications? Or is it D, a set of Microsoft data center services that can host and manage your hardware infrastructure?
Yeah, so for those of you that are watching, you can visit the link there, and you can answer the question yourself before we reveal the answer. And so we'll give you just a second to go ahead and do that in the poll, and then we'll reveal the answer here. And so, Hari Ram, I'm gonna go with a virtual machine, Azure virtual machines running Linux, provisioned within a virtual network infrastructure.
Oh, okay.
All right. Question number 2.
Question number 2 is which of the following Azure services is a platform as a service or a PaaS that can host Linux applications? Is it Azure Cognitive Services, Search APIs, or virtual machines, or Azure Migrate, or the Azure App Service?
It's another good question. So we'll give
I'm,
some time for folks to
I'm getting a lot of votes for D.
for D.
Uh-huh.
All right, cool. Let's check it out. So that's what I think it is as well. Azure App Service, and ding ding ding, that's the right answer. So question number 3, and I think this is the final question here.
Yeah. So which of the following is not a benefit of using an endorsed Linux distribution on Azure? Is it availability of optimized, regularly updated VM images, SLA connectivity guarantees, enhance compatibility with additional programming languages, or is it D, a distribution specific benefits like SAP integration?
Another good question. Are we seeing answers coming in on this one?
Yeah, we are having a tough fight between options B and C.
Ah, okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and answer, and I'm gonna go with C. Awesome.
Okay. Yes, quite a few of them have got that right.
So if you're looking for more resources on the content that I covered, definitely visit the link and check that out. And I think now we're going to move to the database portion.
All right. Thanks, Steve. That was a fantastic presentation with a lot of very informative content. So thanks for that.
Thank you.
So hello everyone. I'm Hariram, and I'm here today to speak about introduction to open source database migration on Azure. Sorry. So today, in this session, I'll be covering mostly features and services available in Azure for hosting an open source database and explaining the key considerations for implementing a migration project. For example, why would somebody want to consider a migration into Azure? So I'm going to offer some compelling reasons for that. Apart from that, we are also going to be talking about different approaches you can take before you can migrate your database. And the most exciting part, at least according to me, is we are going to be going through a demo of all the latest migration tools that are available, which you can use to seamlessly migrate into Azure. All right. So a lot of businesses choose Azure. So for a lot of reasons and a lot of compelling reasons, if I may add. So some of them are automatic updates. So Azure ensures that you don't have to worry about any of the infrastructure for hosting your workloads. So you can focus freely on your application, on your data, and on your business, most importantly, and you can leave the rest of it to Azure. And a lot of businesses who choose Azure choose it because they want to grow and they want to scale. So fuel for this is scaling compute and storage, and Azure provides it at the click of a button. So that is another compelling reasons why businesses choose Azure. Thirdly is the built-in compliance and security. As Steve also mentioned, Microsoft takes security very seriously, and we endeavor to provide enterprise level security and proactively address any security threats and always offer all our customers advanced threat protection. And also, finally, the Azure IP advantage, where you are assured that the IP you're using is best in class in industry and you're covered against any indemnification issues. And yeah, going forward, just to add a note, MySQL and MariaDB, since they are very similar, I'll be covering them together as part of this course. All right. Steve actually extensively talked about this IaaS and PaaS and where customers have a lot of options depending across the spectrum, whether you need a lot of control over your database, right from the hardware, the OS, the patching, or you want to solely focus on your business, your applications, and your data, and you want to leave the rest of it Azure. So for everyone, there is a choice, there is an offering which they can pick based upon their focus area, their capability, and what they want to focus on. So there's a whole lot of offerings available across the spectrum, right from IaaS, PaaS, or on-prem. So customers are free to pick and choose any offering as per their need. And next, we move specifically into MySQL. MySQL, as you know, is a very popular database adopted by a lot of developers and businesses as well. And Azure Database for MySQL is the PaaS implementation of MySQL. So, adding to the advantages that MySQL provides to the users, Azure adds value in terms of high availability, scalability, enterprise level security, and always being highly available and providing automatic backups, and finally securing your data, your applications, and in general your business. So Azure Database for MySQL offers a compelling offering in this regard. And similarly for Postgres SQL as well. Postgres SQL, as you know, is a very popular database engine, both for developers as well as businesses. And it offers a rich query language, a rich database engine, which with data types, extensions, asset properties, and rich indexing. So Azure adds on to these advantages by giving additional security, compliance, and good ecosystem integration with the rest of the Azure services for you to leverage the maximum from what Azure has to offer. And finally, the ability to scale up and out your business as well as your compute and storage so that you get the maximum out of Azure and moving to Azure, your database to Azure. So this is applicable across MySQL and PostgreSQL, and for you to take advantage of when you move your database to Azure. Now, when you after you move your database to Azure, typically the first question on your mind is like, how can I manage the database? Like, how can I control it? How can I tweak the various parameters? So typically, some of the most popular avenues of doing that is the Azure portal. So this is very user friendly, and there are a lot of levers on the portal when you log into your VM or your instance of PostgreSQL or MySQL, where you can modify different parameters of your server. And apart for power users who want to write and execute scripts that modify or control a lot of instances en masse, there are the Azure PowerShell and the Azure command line interface offerings available, where users can typically write scripts and control and manage a batch of servers together. And in summary, for both MySQL and PostgreSQL, if I have to summarize the advantage of moving your database to Azure, it has to be the fully managed community databases that make sure that any recent updates, any recent features that are released in the open source community, any recent fixes are immediately available to you, and so that you can extract the maximum out of the Azure databases that are on offer. Apart from that, as Steve also mentioned, cost is always an important criterion. And the Azure database for MySQL and PostgreSQL, both of them offer best-in-class total cost of ownership to make sure that you get the maximum bang for your buck. And a third compelling factor is the built-in intelligence, the various analytical tools available for you to see how your application is doing, see how your business is doing, and innovate further on your application. And of course, the ability to scale your business up and out. And the best part is all of this is covered under the security and compliance guarantee that Microsoft provides in terms of making sure that your data is secure and has the enterprise grade security that it deserves, right? And apart from that, you can always leverage the rest of the Azure services through seamless integration of your database with the rest of them, so that if you need to run any analytics on your workloads, it is just a click away. So that is one of the main advantages of having your databases on Azure. So you can be like a kid in a candy shop where you have access to a whole lot of tools to play around with and to improve the performance of your application as well as your business. And yeah, now that we have seen all the benefits of Azure database for MySQL as well as PostgreSQL, like are there any further reasons why customers and businesses move to Azure? So a lot of them, we see moving to Azure are primarily due to a host of reasons. Apart from the benefits that Azure offers, they are for example, software end of support with their existing vendor, or they need to manage their cash flow better since Azure gives better total cost of ownership. And if they need to innovate their application better, or even mundane reasons such as software and hardware refresh, or they need urgent capacity needs, or even existential threats such as the COVID-19, which forced a lot of businesses to go digital. So there are a lot of reasons, and a lot of reasons for which customers come to us and uh, try to migrate their businesses and their databases to the cloud. And we are more than happy to help customers do that and help their businesses thrive. And once customers embark on their migration journey, typically there are different ways you can go about it. So, for example, we can do a lift and shift where you know what you want and you just want to lift your existing database from where you're currently operating and into Azure, and you point your application to the new target and you go about your business like nothing has happened. Like overnight, you are in Azure and your businesses and your application are working as usual. We can also do a phased migration where you have a period of testing to make sure that your application works perfectly with the Azure databases, MySQL and PostgreSQL. And once you're fully satisfied with the way your application is working, so you can do phase migrations. For example, if you have different functions within your company, such as HR, finance, or operations, you could move function by function, or it's you have a whole lot of choices there. The only things which need to be considered when you are performing phase migrations and maintaining parallel systems is that you have to be mindful of any conflicts. For example, the databases in both places are updated, like which update do you take first, and also plan for any changes in network traffic patterns since you are maintaining parallel systems, and also latency. For example, the database which you're currently at, if it gets updated a little later than the database on Azure, like how do you deal with this latency, and how do you deal with consistency across both these databases? These are some of the things you may have to plan for when you think about phase migrations and maintaining parallel systems. And yeah, coming to the migration aspect as such, like if you have to look at migration, basically there are a number of tools available, open source tools, first party Microsoft tools, as well as third party tools. But before all that, there are two ways of migrating data. One, you have the physical migration and the logical migration. The physical migration involves just moving data from source point A to point B. There are a lot of pros associated with it. It is quick, and it scales very well with size. However, the logical migration, which involves reading the source data and converting it into SQL statements and playing it out into the target, that also offers a lot of advantages in terms of being storage architecture agnostic. The logical migration does not care whether you're moving from storage type A to storage type B. It will make sure that your database data is converted to SQL statements and played out exactly as the target storage wants it. And the other advantage with logical migration is that you can migrate across versions. For example, you want to move from PostgreSQL version 9.6 on your on-prem to you want to move to PostgreSQL, the latest version 14 or 15 on the target on Azure. You can do that as well with logical migration without any issues. So all the storage and the version constraints are taken care of in logical migrations. Only thing is, the time taken is a bit more than physical migration, so you would have to plan for it. And here is where the two modes of migration comes in, right? You have the offline mode of migration and the online mode of migration. In offline mode of migration, what the migration tooling does is it takes a snapshot of your source database and starts migrating it to the target. So what happens here is after the snapshot, if there are any updates or any writes coming into the source, they are not migrated to the target. So it's only from a point in time, it's migrated to the target. So as a result, I mean, it is a manual process, but it's very simple, and it's suitable for small size databases, mainly because there is a downtime involved here. For example, if you're going to take a snapshot and migrate it to the target, you're going to be losing changes that come in after that until the migration finishes. So if your application is okay with a little bit of downtime, offline migration is definitely the way to go. It is very simple. It's not complicated at all. And um, it's our recommended way of migrating from the source to the target. If your application has a very low tolerance for downtime, then the online migration is the way to go. In this case, the application is always available. And when the data is being migrated from the source to the target, all the changes that come in during the time are also captured and later played out onto the target. We will be seeing a demo of the online migration, so you can understand better what I'm trying to explain here. So logical replication is one way of doing online migration. In SQL, it's the data in MySQL, it's the data and replication. Online mode of migration, of course, it comes with its share of challenges in terms of the data types it can migrate during the change data capture and not. So there are a lot of things to take care of. So it's a bit more complicated than the offline migration. And again, like if your application can withstand some downtime and is quite tolerant to it, then offline migration is definitely the way to go. But if you need your application to be always available, then yeah, you can please go ahead and try the online migration. Now we come to the Azure database migration service. So this is one of the popular tools used in Azure for migrating databases from the source to the target. So this offers both online and offline mode. So, and this is a semi-automated process where you dump the schema and restore it onto the target, and then use the Azure database migration service or the Azure DMS to migrate the data from the source to the target. So in this case, whether the database is small or large, it doesn't matter, because there is the online migration mode available as well, and it will ensure that your changes are replicated from the source to the target when the migration is in progress. And given that a lot of customers want to migrate to Azure to make take advantage of the offerings that are available, we also have a lot of third-party tools such as Stream from ClickSense and from Fivetran as well. And these tools also offer migrations both online and offline modes. All right. So when customers move to Azure, typically the most popular and the most recommended target is the flexible server, which is applicable for both MySQL and PostgreSQL. So it is quite popular because it gives you maximum control of your databases, whether it is your network configuration with VNet integration or more server parameters to control how your server or your database behaves. And of course, the best one is the custom maintenance windows, where you have control over when your application goes down for you to conduct any maintenance tasks. The other reason is for users to build resilient apps, since the app as well as the database can be co-located in the same zone, hence reducing latency. There's also fast failover with zero data loss and zone redundant high availability. And the best part is developers find it a delight to work with, mainly because of the simple end-to-end deployment and being fully compliant with the community MySQL and PostgreSQL editions, as well as cost optimization, where you can easily stop your servers, and you also have burstable servers where, depending upon your need, you can scale up and down so that your cost is always optimized. Okay, so we saw all the migration tools available, the different modes available for, and the advantages of moving to Azure for MySQL and PostgreSQL. So we'll just go through a couple of demos for you to see, know what I'm talking about. And we are really excited to show this demo, which has just been unveiled. And in this demo, I'm going to migrate MySQL VM to Azure database for MySQL flexible server using the Azure DMS. So yeah, let's start the demo. All right. So here, if you see, I have MySQL VM open, and I have the employee database loaded in it. And there are about 300,000 or 3 lakh employee records in it. So I'm just going to go ahead and refresh this just to make sure that we do have 300,000 rows in the employee database. Yeah, we do have 300,000. Okay. So I'm just going to now flip over to the Azure portal, where I have the Azure database migration service. And here I have to click on the new migration project to start migration. And when I do that, I have an option to enter the project name. So I'm just going to give as employees online. And for my source server, I'm going to select MySQL, since it's a MySQL migration. And the target server type is, of course, automatically selected. And this is, I want to preview demo an online migration, and that's what I'm going to be selecting here. And in my next tab, I select the source details. Here, they are automatically, my credentials are saved. So I just enter the source server name and from where I want to migrate. And these details are filled in automatically. I just click on next. And in the next tab, I enter the target details. Yeah, I enter the target details, and here once I select the location, and this is the location of where my target server is situated, and I'm going to select West US2, so that is where this target server is located, and the resource group to which the target server belongs. So this is populated automatically. So just I just have to choose from the drop down. And once I do that, for security purposes, I enter the username and password. Yeah, in the next page, I select the databases that I want to migrate. I see that none of the databases are available on the target. So what I have to do now is go to the flexible server on the portal and stage the database that I want to migrate. It's a pretty straightforward process. I go to databases, I click on add, and I enter the employee database which I want to migrate. So I enter the name of the database and I click on save for it to create the database on the target. So it just takes a couple of seconds. And once this is done, I go back to the Azure database migration service, where once I refresh the screen, I am able to see this database as well listed on the target. So as you can see here, it is still not reflected here. So I just have to do a screen refresh. I go back and come back to select databases, and the employees database will be listed there. Yeah. So I select the database to migrate. And in the next tab, it lists all the tables that are available under the employee database. So there are about 6 tables here. So I list and select all of them. So I want to migrate all these employee databases to the target. So I do that, and in the next tab, there are the configure. I can configure the migration settings. So here I can do a lot of fine tuning, like how I want the migration to proceed in terms of the data chunk sizes, the range counts, the batch sizes, etc. Um, Typically, we advise customers to leave it as it is, because the Azure DMS automatically selects the most optimized setting to make sure that the migration has the best settings in store. So even for replication, like this is a phase where the changes occurring during the migration are transmitted to the target. So even the replication settings can be configured in terms of the heartbeat duration and the connection timeout values, etc. So even that can be configured here. So I'm going to leave it as it is without changing anything, because Azure DMS is going to configure the best settings for my migration. And in my summary screen, I just give a name for the activity. So I'm going to be giving employees online here again. Once I do that, I can click on create migration. And once I do that, the Azure DMS behind the scenes, it sets up, it provisions a DMS, it sets up the necessary migration infrastructure, and the data migration starts. So as you can see here, the initial load starts running and the employee database is being migrated. We have 1 out of 6 tables completed, and I'm going to fast forward a bit until the all the tables are completed, so that I can show you how the replication happens in case of online. So now the initial load has completed. So this is the snapshot we have taken of the employees database when we started the migration. So this has completed. Now, from since the snapshot has been taken, like what are all the changes that have happened? So I want to migrate them as well. So I'm going to click on replicate data changes. So as you know, like during this demo, we have not made any changes at the source for it to be reflected on the target. So the number of rows inserted or updated during this have been 0. So I'm going to test this by maybe inserting some data or modifying a row. So I'm going to change the values of employee 10,001 and change the salary to 90,000. So once I do that, I can select it to make sure that the changes have gone in. And yeah, so employee number 10,001 on that date has salary as 90,000. So this change has been made at the source. Now we have to verify that it has been made on the target as well. So I'm going to go back to the DMS. I'm going to make sure that the changes have been migrated. So as you can see here, the number of rows inserted and updated at the source is 1 right now. And the target is about 5 seconds behind the source. So we have almost caught up with the source in terms of the changes made. So what I can do now is go ahead and initiate the cutover from the target to the source. So I go to the top of screen where we have the start cutover. So once I click on that, I there is a set of instructions, a set of do's and don'ts. Like, for example, we have to stop all the incoming transactions and make sure all pending transactions have been transmitted to the target. And once we are sure of that, I can click on confirm and I can click on apply. And the migration is now completed with the cutover completing from the source to the target. Yeah, so it's a pretty easy, straightforward process, as you can see. I'm also going to go back and connect to the target database and verify that my changes have indeed gone in. So I'm entering my password here and using my SSL certificate to connect to the target database, which I have stored here. Yeah, once I do that, I can click on OK and we're all set. So I'm connected to my target database here. And these are the employee tables which were just migrated from the source to the target. So if I select the rows, I can see that the employee number 10,001 on that particular day with salary as 90,000 has been migrated to the target. Yep. So that brings us to an end of the online migration of MySQL into Azure database for MySQL Flexible Server. So as you can see, it's quite simple and it's quite straightforward as well to understand and perform your migration and move your database to Azure MySQL for Flexible Server. Yeah, so what we saw now was a migration of the MySQL database. Similarly, the Azure DMS can also be used to migrate the PostgreSQL database. The entire procedure is the same, where you set up, enter details for the source and the target. And yeah, with a few clicks of a button, you can start migrating from the source database to the target. We also have, along with migrating into Azure, we also have a lot of customers using other offerings such as the single server on Azure and who want to move to the flexible server, which of course is more feature rich and offers more functionality from the latest PG versions. So we also have a new tool which we are very excited to unveil and which customers can use to migrate their database from single server to flexible server. So yeah, I'm just going to go through a very quick demo of this tool as well. So here I've opened the menu for the single server. And here, if you look at the banner on top, I can migrate from the single server by clicking on migrate now here. Or I can also go to the flexible server in Azure and I can click on the migration option in the side pane. Now, before I begin any sort of migration from the single server to the flexible server, so there is one prerequisite that I have to take care of, which is to allow list all the extensions that my single server PostgreSQL is using and allow list them on the flexible server as well. So I use this query, and using a tool such as pgadmin, I connect to the database on the source server and execute the query to get all the extensions that are in use in the single server. As you know, PostgreSQL is offers a lot of extensions, rich capability in terms of extensions, and I'm going to be making a note of these extensions and allow listing them on the flexible server as well. So here I have three extensions, and I go to the server parameters menu on the flexible server. So you will see that on the left. So once you click that, you can search for extensions server parameter. And here, in the interest of time, I have already enabled all these extensions on the flexible server. So that we don't have to select them and wait for it to be enabled. So I have already enabled them on the flexible server. So once this is done, we are all ready to start the migration. So I click on migration tab, and it takes me to the migration grid where it shows a history of all the migrations I have attempted into this flexible server. As you can see, there are a lot of migrations I've tried. Some have succeeded, some have failed. So this is a new migration. So I'm going to click on migrate from single server. And when I do this, it takes me to the first screen where here I have already taken care of the prerequisite, right? Where it requires allow listing of the extension. So there's nothing for me to do here other than just enter the migration name for me to get started with the migration. So I'm going to give migration demo as the migration name. And in the next screen, I enter the source details. I select the source server I want to migrate from. So single online 3 is the source, and I enter the admin password for the single server. And once I do that, I select the databases which I want to migrate from the single server. Basically, Postgres and DVD on single are the two databases on this source. And I want to migrate both of them. And I have an option to choose offline or online migration. So we just saw an online migration, so I'm going to show an offline migration in this demo. So I select offline, and in the next page, the target details are automatically populated since this is where I initiated the migration from. So all I have to do is enter the admin password for the target, for of course for security reasons. And once I do that, it also alerts me that these databases are already on the target from my past migrations. So it asks me if I want to overwrite these databases in this migration. I select yes, and in the next screen, I can review all the details of the details I've selected so far, both the source details as well as the target details before I hit create. So what happens is once I hit create, these settings are taken and migration activity is created. And this activity can be seen appearing in the migration grid immediately. And it shows that it's in progress and all the migration infrastructure, the prerequisite steps are being run for the job to be set up. So I can also click on the migration demo to get more details on what is happening in the migration. So if I click on it, it takes me to a page where it gives a little more detail about the migration. And once the migration infrastructure has been set up, the databases which are being migrated, they also appear on the screen. And I can click on the individual databases as well. So clicking on the databases will give me migration details specific to the database. For example, DVD on single contains so and so tables, and so many tables were copied. So many errors have occurred. So I can do this as the migration is in progress. And once the data migration completes, the state moves from in progress and it moves to succeeded. And even after the migration has succeeded, I can click on the databases for a summary of the migration details, like how many, for example, 16 tables were copied here. And in case of Postgres, one table, I guess, yeah, one table has been copied from the source to the target. And if I go back to the migration grid, I can see that I can just refresh and see that the migration from source to single server to target flexible server has indeed completed. And I can also go back to PG admin and go to the target flexible server and see that, yeah, my database has been migrated, and I can see all the tables and the data as well reflecting on the target. So as you can see, this is a very simple migration demo of the PostgreSQL single server to the flexible server on Azure. And this is now GA. It's available for everyone to use and migrate their workloads from single server to flexible server. Yeah. So for PostgreSQL, we saw two kinds of tools. One was the Azure DMS, and which can take any source, whether it is AWS, GCP, on-prem, and migrate it to Azure on Azure database for PostgreSQL on the cloud as a PaaS service. We also saw the single to flex migration tool, which takes the single server as the source and migrates it to Azure database for PostgreSQL flexible server, also on Azure. So for all these migrations, they're pretty straightforward. However, a lot of customers have also asked us for some sort of an assessment tooling, like they want to assess their workload before they want to try the migration, whether they are migration ready in terms of all the compliance they need to do for their database before they move to the cloud. So we did listen, and we came up with an assessment tool which our customers, which users can use to migrate their data. Before migrating their database to Azure, they can run assessment tests to see if there are any red flags they need to address before they migrate to Azure. So this PostgreSQL migration extension helped us that. So I'm just going to quickly walk through this tool as well. So it is part of the Azure Data Studio, which is a tool offered by Microsoft. And if you go to the Azure Data Studio marketplace, you have the Azure PostgreSQL migrate extension. So you have a lot of extensions which you can load it. So here I'm interested in the PostgreSQL migration extension. So this is the extension that is used to assess your workload before you want to move to Azure. This extension has a couple of dependencies. One is the PostgreSQL extension and the .NET runtime extension. So the PostgreSQL extension that it has dependency on. So we see the list of dependencies here upon clicking the dependencies tab. So once I click that, the PostgreSQL extension shows up, and the PostgreSQL extension is basically used to communicate with your PostgreSQL instance, the source, to manage the PostgreSQL instances and to perform any other maintenance tasks. So this extension is leveraged to by the assessment extension to run the assessment tests. So once this happens, we can begin with the assessment. In the interest of time, I have just set up the connection between the PostgreSQL extension as well as the tooling. So I'm going to go ahead and use that. But if you were to set up a new extension, you can click on new extension, and you can enter the different connection types, and this will make sure that you connect properly to your MySQL instance. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to the actual assessment. So here, once the assessment tool starts, I can select the databases which I want to assess. So, and here I can choose whether I want to automatically correct the performance data of the source, or I can manually enter the performance parameters as well. So I'm going with automatically collecting the performance data, since this assessment does a pretty good job of assessing your source. And I can also set the duration for which I want to run this assessment. So once that is done, I can move ahead, and the assessment is in progress. And it takes a bit of time. So it runs for the duration that you have requested it to run. So after 10 minutes, you have a set of results showing what is the ideal target platform for your source, and also the best SKU in terms of which SKU the target, like which SKU is a good ideal destination for your source, as well as the other assessment details. You can click on more, for example, the view details for the SKU, and it gives a lot of reasoning, like why the SKU was suggested for your source to run your workload. So it's pretty informative that way. It's really cool, the kind of information it gives. And you can run a very comprehensive assessment. And you can also click on the different features that the target offers. And in this case, the server, all these features are available on the target. And the server settings is a very interesting feature added here, where it shows a mismatch between all the source and the target settings. So, and also recommendations where you can set right by making sure that the source is compatible with the target. And you also have a database level assessment where, for example, this PostgreSQL database has these two extensions which are not compatible, and these are the two blocking issues here. And the best part of this assessment is you can go ahead and save this assessment report for future reference. So once you click on save, you can save it as an HTML file, and you can always come back to it later to refer the assessment if need be. All right. So that takes us to an end of the third demo. I hope you enjoyed all the demos. And we are here at the knowledge check.
Yeah, great demos, Ari Ram. That was really cool to see that stuff. So,
Yeah, thanks, Steve.
all right. So, question number one, I'll go ahead and read it. You want to create a highly available database system that requires the minimum of administrative time to run. Should you use IaaS or PaaS approach? Should you use an IaaS or a PaaS approach? And then the questions are A, use an IaaS approach, create a set of virtual machines to run your system and connect them using a virtual network. You have full control over the database and server running on these virtual machines. B, use a PaaS approach, for example, run a PostgreSQL database using Azure Database for PostgreSQL. Or C, use either. So we'll give another minute here for answers to roll in. And I think if you want to go ahead and answer it, Hari Ram, go ahead.
Yeah, the answer is the PaaS approach, which both of us spoke about a lot. So the PaaS approach is where you have this advantage. Yep. That requires minimum administrative time.
Nice. All
All
right.
right.
So question number two, you want to run a MySQL database in an IaaS environment in which you'll create a new instance as quickly as possible. Should you use a virtual machine? Should you use virtual machines or containers? Ooh, this is a different one. We have containers in the mix here. So answer A would be use containers. Answer B would be use virtual machines, and answer C would be use either. So I think we can go ahead and answer. Which one do you think it is?
I think it is containers. Yeah, not bad. I still have my bearings right. Yeah, it's use containers.
Nice.
All right, we go to the next question.
Next question. You want to migrate individual applications and users running specific workloads to the cloud as an initial step in migrating your system. If successful, you'll migrate further workloads until the entire system has been moved. How would you do this? Answer A, perform an online migration of the database. Answer B, follow a piecemeal approach to migration. Answer C, perform an offline migration of the database. This is a good one. This is a tricky one here. So I think we can go ahead and answer in the interest of time.
Uh-huh.
B, follow a piecemeal approach to the migration. Interesting. All right, question number 4, and I think this is the final question.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Which migration approach for an on-premises MySQL database to Azure SQL database takes the least amount of administrative effort? A, use the SQL Server Migration Assistant. B, do an online migration using the Azure Database Migration Service. Or C, upload the data to the Azure Storage and configure Azure SQL Database to read the data from the storage account.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
I think,
this is a bit of a curveball. Like this is the Azure SQL database we're talking here as a target.
yeah, this is a curveball. So I think we can go ahead and answer this one. Okay, interesting. Um, any insight into why it was number A or letter A?
Sorry, what was that?
Any insight into why it was letter A over, like, let's say, the Azure Database Migration Service?
Yeah, so the SQL Server Migration Assistant is quite easy. It's very, with just a few minimum clicks of button and very little administrative effort, you can migrate databases to the SQL database. So yeah,
Nice,
it's really easy and very pain free.
nice, very nice. Okay, folks. So that brings us to the end of our time here.
Hmm.
So again, if you want more resources about anything that Hari Ram covered, feel free to visit that link for more resources there. And I'll let you do the summary here.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Steve. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the session today. Like today, we talked about various tools and services that bring additional value to Linux workloads. And the best part was all the talking about all the features and services that are available on offer and in Azure for you to pick and choose from. And of course, the key considerations for you to implementing a migration project, like why would you migrate? What are the incentives? What are the compelling reasons? And the different approaches that you can take for migrating databases. And my favorite part was definitely showing off the first party tools that we have developed and which customers are using to migrate MySQL and PostgreSQL workloads to Azure. And of course, an introduction to the pre-migration assessment for PostgreSQL, which is, of course, it is not a mandatory tool, but it's just an accessory for migration if you want to use it. So yeah, there are a lot of tools for you to pick and choose from, and we look forward for you to use them and also to hear your feedback to improve it. All
That's
right.
awesome.
So
And that's the first time these tools have been shown, or
the MySQL online migration, yes, it has been in preview just recently, and the single server to flexible server migration actually went GA just yesterday.
oh
So
wow, that's
though
exciting.
though my demo shows it as preview on the left, it's going to be GA from tomorrow. So the label is going to be changed. So yeah, so it's a great timing for this Azure webinar and for users to make use of the tool.
That's great. So this was a special Learn Live. So um,
Yep.
so again, if anyone is interested in going through the Learn Live, visit those links, and also don't miss the next Learn Live coming up in the series. So configure virtual machine availability. Thanks for attending, everyone.
Hey, thanks everyone. Have a good one. Bye bye.